Hello there, it's Tom here, and this is chapter 20 of Gunnerkrigg Court, Coyote Stories. With this chapter, I came to a bit of a standstill because I wasn't really quite sure what to talk about, because I felt that it really stood on its own, and a lot of the stuff that happens in the chapter is fairly self-explanatory. But it is the first chapter where we get to spend some time with Coyote and Asengrin, and I've heard a lot of people mention it as one of their favourites. And speaking of favourites, this is one of my favourite chapter cover graphics. But anyway, we start off with the gang as Annie is getting ready to head out into the forest. Because, as mentioned in the last chapter, she wanted to ask Coyote directly just what the deal with the court is, see if maybe he knew anything about it. And Jones basically calls her out on this. So these jerks hightail it across the bridge, and we come to Asengrin. With these two panels here, I wanted it to sort of look like the tree is moving out of the way of Asengrin here, but I'm not quite sure I captured it really well. But after a little back talk, Annie shuts Asengrin down and they head off into the forest, where we get our first formal introduction of Coyote. And I guess I should talk a bit about the design of Coyote. You might notice that he doesn't really look anything like a coyote at all. He actually looks more like a cross between some kind of horse and a greyhound. And I went with this sort of design because I knew that he was going to have a very malleable shape, but I also took into consideration that as the kind of creature that Coyote is, he's really in control of what he looks like. And so a character as proud as Coyote is, I figured even though he has a basic canine shape, he would want to portray himself as having sort of shapely, slender legs and a long, strong back, and first and foremost a head which is basically just a mouth full of big teeth. Here the teeth are flat, but we see that he sometimes has pointy teeth, and indeed a lot of his body is changing, sometimes in ways more subtle than others. Like in this last panel here, we see that while Coyote is looking Annie directly in the face and she is looking at him, the other markings on his body, which look like his eyes, also seem to be looking at her from behind. But again, since he is so proud, one of the things that he asks Annie to do is to tell stories about him. And this just gave me an opportunity to interpret some of the stories that I'd encountered while researching Coyote. But luckily it's not all just self-indulgent sort of storytelling on my part. The sort of stuff that he talks about here is stuff that comes up again later on, and is very important to not only the story of the comic, but to Coyote as a character, and some of his motivations too. One of the things that I enjoyed most about researching Coyote was, not only did he never have a consistent shape or being, but he also never seemed to have a very consistent personality. Sometimes he was the clever trickster, and other times he was a complete jackass, often falling foul to tricks that other animals made on him, or sometimes defeating himself with his stupid ideas and his plans. So when I came to writing my version of Coyote, I wanted him to seem kind of foolish and happy on the outside, but make his overall character a little more sinister, almost so that you never really know where exactly you are with Coyote. He might seem happy and playful one minute, but then also quite dangerous in the next. And the only thing you can really be sure about my version of Coyote is that what you're seeing is not the whole picture. And he's definitely hiding something and reveling in the fact that he knows that you know he is hiding something, I guess I could describe it as. And while that stuff becomes more apparent later on in the story, this chapter is mainly about Coyote revealing why he happens to live in a forest somewhere in the UK, and his motivations for coming over to Europe and looking for Renard. Renard being the European equivalent of the trickster god Coyote, so in a mythological sense they are cousins, and how he met Asengrin and eventually created the ravine between the court and the forest, as well as dropping small hints to the reader as to what might come later. And here's where we have one of the better known sequences in the comic where he pulls the moon down towards Annie and she pokes it. We also have another mention of animals and humans changing their bodies with creatures in the forest. This links back to the test that Ali mentioned a few chapters ago. And since Coyote and Renard are essentially old friends, we start to hear some background details of Renard's story, like how he was in love with Annie's mom and how he was wanted by the court because he killed somebody. And Annie finding out for the first time that maybe Renard isn't some bloodthirsty creature that she originally thought he was, and had only really caused the death of one man. Because up till now he's just been described as a demon and a monster by other people like Eglamour and the Donlans and such. And we have a bit more details on the gifts that Coyote seems to bestow on the people that he likes, like the gift of being able to control trees that Asengrin has. So they blab on a bit like a big bunch of blabby jerks, and after a passing mention of Coyote's great secret, he decides to call the meeting to an end. So Annie goes back across the bridge, and meeting up again with Cat at some big observatory, we see that despite Cat not noticing any anomalies happening with the moon, when they take a look at it, it turns out that Annie's left her big fingerprint on the moon. And this was a permanent change in the universe of Gunnerkrigg, where the moon will always be shown with a fingerprint on it now. And I think it's funny to mention that I did receive some criticism as to how I drew the fingerprint on the moon here, despite it actually being my own fingerprint. So I'm not really sure what else I could have drawn, but that's neither here nor there. And this bonus page is another opportunity for me to tell a short story that I summarized after doing some research on Coyote, and again it was just an excuse to draw a bunch of weird stuff. And it should go without saying that I love drawing Coyote and a lot of the forest scenes, because it allows me to be a lot freer than I am with the scenes in the court. It's good fun to have a character that, no matter how much I stretch and bend off model, just the markings on him and his colours make him identifiable. And as a semi-antagonist, Coyote is a pretty good counterpart to the court itself. So anyway, this is the first real look at a character that a lot of people seem to enjoy, and we will definitely come back and see both Coyote and Asengrin in the future. And that's it for this chapter, so come back again for chapter 21, Blinking.